For more on tonight's Canada-U.S. game, we're joined by TSN's Claire Hanna in Boston. Claire, thank you so much for joining us. There must be so much tension right now, Canada versus the United States. What's the atmosphere like?
I wouldn't call it tension. I would call it excitement, because when I've spoken to players on both sides of the ice, both the Americans and the Canadians, they just say that they have been waiting so long for a chance like this to play best on best, to test their skills against the best in the world. And I think if Saturday's game was any indication of what we're going to expect, it's going to be a battle. Now, Connor McDavid was asked about that game on Saturday night, and he said that game had everything you wanted in a hockey game. It was emotional. It was competitive. It was fast. It was tight checking. He also said it sucks it didn't go their way, but this thing is far from over. Of course, Canada had that must-win game against Finland on Monday. That was high stakes. They got it done, and now they get a rematch against the United States in the final. And on both sides, players, some of them are saying this is the biggest game that they're ever going to play. Or maybe not ever going to play, but at this point in their careers, it's the biggest game they'll play. And that's coming from some Stanley Cup winners. So it's really interesting to hear some of the emotions ahead of this game. And I mean, the hype is up.
So what are we expecting tonight from the actual game?
Well, I think in the game, there's a couple of notices, but for the Canadians, they've only made one lineup change. Seth Jarvis is coming in for Travis Konecny. It's on the American side that there's been some interesting developments. Charlie McAvoy, who was a huge player in that Saturday night game, he's going to be out for tonight's game. Now, on Monday night, Austin Matthews and Matthew Tkachuk were not playing in that game, and Brady Tkachuk left halfway through the game with an injury. Those three players are all going to be available tonight. Head coach Mike Sullivan, the American head coach, said that on top of Charlie McAvoy, he's the only one not available, but he wouldn't say who their lineups were going to be. But I think what people need to watch for is defense, because these teams are really good at offense. They like to score goals, but both have keyed in on the defense. That was something that the Canadians were really working on in practice yesterday. But I think it's just going to be exciting. One of the best games we've seen in maybe a decade.
So no surprise here, but Trump used tonight's game to repeat calls for Canada to become the 51st state. What's been the reaction to that?
Well, that's an interesting question. It was all that any of the reporters were talking about when we first arrived here. And when we got into the American dressing room to speak with them, the American players were really excited. They had heard that they were going to be hearing from President Donald Trump. He called this morning. It was originally supposed to be a Zoom call, but there were some technical difficulties. So he called. It was on speakerphone. He wished the Americans good luck. He wanted to spur them to victory tonight against the Canadians. But when we asked the Canadians about this, they really said it didn't matter to them. Head coach John Cooper was asked if there was any extra motivation given to the Canadians because of that phone call. He said no. And I asked Mitch Marner, who plays for the Toronto Maple Leafs, I said, do you think that's bulletin board material? And he said, sure, but honestly, all we're thinking about for tonight's game is winning. It's this best on best. We just want to think about the game. And I think for the Canadians, what they can show is if they win, that's prideful. That proves they're the best in the world. And that's really their main focus in tonight's game, not the politics.
Okay, thank you so much for this, Claire. We appreciate it. Looking forward to tonight. Claire Hanna is from TSN.